Yeah, welcome back, everybody. I'm here with the one and only Chad McBain. My name is Luke McBain. Together, we're two brothers in Bitcoin. And today, we're going to look at what you brought us in terms of news. And the first thing I want to start off with is just maybe where we left off last time. And I just need to open up the chart here again. I just want to start off with this chart again. Of course, as we always emphasize, we're not giving financial advice, and past prices say and price developments say nothing about future price developments. But I think the context matters in terms of the news which you brought us, where we are right now in terms of the price, because that's sort of like context I found rather interesting, is to say, well, if we look how we're where we are right now, it seems we might be just experiencing now the beginning of another bull market, because we have the halving 6 months after the halving, and we have similar upswings always in November of that year. If we look at November 2020, we see here that in November 2020 we were already above the all-time high here. And here we have November, and we're already above the all-time high, which was, where was it? Here. Um, so that seems to be like, might be a repetition. So we might be experiencing an upswing, but no matter what, we are already at an all-time high. And of course, that could crash down. And we always say, no, we'll have some interesting months ahead of us to see what's going to happen. Um, in this environment where we are already at an all-time high, we have a piece of news here, which is Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy plans to raise 42 billion to buy more Bitcoin. So not only that, he already has a lot of Bitcoin, he wants to buy 42 billion of more Bitcoin over the next 3 years, which means within this cycle. And yeah, I wonder. Uh, I mean, I don't know if we need to go into the details of this article here. I was just wondering, is this the right timing to buy Bitcoin, actually? And again, we're not giving advice to anybody, but I'm just looking at this going like, wow, why now?
Right.
What's the point of this? And in the next 3 years, where there most certainly will be a crash again, and if we believe the cycle will repeat itself, we'll see a lot of excitement in the next couple of months, and then we will see a lot of tears, and the value of tears of people saying, why did I invest in Bitcoin? No,
Yeah.
it's 70% less. Like, what did I do to myself? And I've been there myself. Like, this is my personal disclosure here. I was in the Valley of Tears myself, and have recovered. And therefore, I've been going emotionally also through this whole cycle, and, had to teach me some tough lessons. Maybe the most toughest of them all is the long-term adventure. This is something which is interesting in the long term. And having now, together with you, also been for some years in this space and observing it, I think that's the most fascinating part of this whole adventure here. Nevertheless, the question, why now, when maybe, the market is, and he knows that, like, he's been in the space also for a long time. He's not new to the space. Like, he's not going to be phased by any euphoria, Bitcoin euphoria. Like, that's not even, like, even when the market is down, he's been, out there doing Bitcoin advocacy, talking about Bitcoin, the future of Bitcoin and how it will develop. He was never, like, even when there was also a lot of negative press about MicroStrategy and gleeful reports, when the last Bitcoin crash happened, that, this company's finished. That's it. They're just, this was wrong. He's a crazy person. They should never allow him to do that with MicroStrategy. The market has crashed. They're finished. And he never like seemed phased by that when you watch the interviews, even in that time period of the
Yeah.
market. But why now? Yeah, that's basically quite. Why does he come up with this thing? Why does he want to buy even more? What's the whole point of that? Doesn't he have enough?
Well, I guess far be it for me to speak for Michael Saylor, but based on the interviews I've seen lately and the stuff that I've read, um, and understanding any true capitalist, there's no such thing as too much, and so no, they don't have enough. But to answer your more serious question as to why now, I think there's probably a couple. couple things behind this. Number one, I think you've already pointed out. Uh, MicroStrategy, which, Michael Saylor has the controlling shares in MicroStrategy, so the board pretty much has to do what he would like to do. So therefore, he slash and MicroStrategy believe wholeheartedly in Bitcoin in its present and as its long-term future. So if they believe, and they do, that the price of Bitcoin, this is their words, not mine, and this is not financial advice, but they believe that over the next 20 years, the price of Bitcoin on the low end would be $3 million 20 years from now, 2045. The median would be $13 million. And on the high end, their extreme bull case is 49 million. These are US dollars. So if they really believe that, then buying Bitcoin at 70, 80, 90, 200, 400, $600,000 is cheap in their minds. So therefore, what difference does it make if I pay that price in 2024, 2025, 2030, 2035, if we believe that by 2045, it's going to be somewhere in between 3 million and 50 million, you know? Now I realize there's a huge delta between those two. So let's use their low projection of 3 million. You could, if you paid $1 million for a Bitcoin that you thought was going to triple in the next 20 years, that's still cheap. So I don't know that they look at it in the same way that maybe you and I do. Now, it is fair to say that they get access to money probably much easier than we do. So they don't maybe have the same concerns as a corporation that we have. So that's one thing. I think their belief in the long-term impact and therefore price discovery of Bitcoin makes this, in their minds, a no-brainer because they think 90,000, 80,000, 70,000, 150, 200,000, they think all of this is cheap. So they're
But
not
but
concerned by the price.
but to the point of a 20-year projection, I mean, which sounds interesting, 3 million as opposed to 90,000. I mean, that's pretty neat. I'm just saying, like, how old is Michael Saylor then going to be in 20? I don't know what his age right now is. I think he's like, what, 60 something?
I think
Or
he's about 60. I think he's right around
yeah,
60.
so that makes him like 80. I don't know if he still wants to be like in, in business with 80 or if he wants to retire at some point. So what's in it for
Well,
him as a person? Like you could say, okay, in 20 years that's going to happen. Some of us might not be alive in 20 years at our age, and hopefully we'll be alive. But is a 20-year horizon, for a person who's already 60, yeah, what is that? Maybe it's good for the company. The company still will exist, but will he still exist and have any benefit from that? Or is he like, what's the whole point for him then?
I think that's an interesting question. So I think if we look at least the way that corporate law is structured in the U.S., the corporation is actually a living thing under corporate law. So to your point, maybe at 80 he won't be here, or even if he is, will he really how much money do you need at 80 um, to see yourself through to your final years? But I don't think that's the point when you're running a corporation. I think to your second comment, the point is the corporation is supposed to be in perpetuity. So therefore, he's simply protecting the long-term viability of the corporation. Now he will be a shareholder, so he will benefit from increased share price. But Michael Saylor also has his own personal stack of Bitcoin that I think is somewhere between 17 and 20,000. So I don't think when MicroStrategy buys Bitcoin, I don't think it's for Michael Saylor. I think it's for the corporation of MicroStrategy. Yeah.
And speaking to that also is the point that here it says, I just saw that in the last paragraph, shares are lower by 10% in after hours trade. I wonder
Mm-hmm.
why that is, but remain roughly 250% higher year to date. So in other words, the last year the shares have gone 250%, which is not bad for a
Yeah.
corporation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't catch the date of the article, but I know the shares have gone up considerably in the last few days. Yeah, that's October 30th. So I think today they're I'd have to check, but I think right now they're currently sitting at about 280% increase for the year. So, but it's a stock market; things go up and
Hmm.
down every day. So, what I would say though is, over the last 3 years, MicroStrategy has the best performing stock on the New York Stock Exchange. Um, so that's pretty interesting. Actually, I shouldn't say the New York Stock Exchange. It actually might be the Nasdaq. I think MicroStrategy trades on the Nasdaq because they're a tech company, but they have the best performing stock, outperforming Nvidia. And I think even people that aren't investors have heard of Nvidia, and how crazy their stock has gone up over the last number of years because they're basically into AI and microchips. But so MicroStrategy's actually outperformed them, and you could argue their software business has not done anything to increase that value. It's all been their Bitcoin investments over the last 3 or 4 years. You know, so they have in the last 3 to 4 years. I'd have to look at the exact date, but their stock is up over 1,100% over I think a 4 year period. So that's over 250% per year. So that's an incredible. Now, to your point, there's been times when it's gone down considerably because their Bitcoin investments are quite volatile. But if you amortize it out over a 3 or 4 year period, they're up substantially. The stock market over that time is probably up about 30%, and they're up over 1,100%. So if you'd invested $1 in MicroStrategy 4 years ago, you'd have $1,100 today. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's the point is it's more to the point of, well, that is just the,
No,
let's
sorry,
say
$11, not 1,100.
that's
You'd be
that's
11 times up. Yeah.
so that's the point is like it's a business strategy
Yes.
which he's running regardless of, like, of course he also hopes for to benefit from that personally, but actually that is just continuing their strategy as micro strategy in terms of what they are as a
Yeah.
company. Yeah.
And if you look at what they're doing, and again, this is not investment advice. I'm just pointing out what they are doing as a company. They are taking what they believe is an asset or a currency that they believe is losing value every year, which is the US dollar. They're taking that and they're trading it for something that they believe is gaining in value every year over the long term. So let's substitute Bitcoin for art. They'd be doing the same thing
Mm.
because they're saying our US dollars are depreciating in value somewhere between 2 and 8% every year. We want to take those and trade them for something that we think is appreciating in value every year. And they believe Bitcoin is the best investment to do that. And so for the last number of years, they've been investing in Bitcoin. So they don't look at the Bitcoin investment as, oh, they've spent billions of dollars on Bitcoin, because they think that the billions of dollars that they've spent over the years would be worth proportionally less by 5, 10, 15% than what it is. So interesting enough, they're now borrowing money to buy more Bitcoin because, again, they believe that the debt they're paying back will be devalued anyway. So if they have to pay it back, the loan in 5 years, paying back $1 billion in 5 years at 5% interest rate means that you're only paying back really $750 million in today's value. So whereas Bitcoin might have doubled or tripled in that time. So that's their approach to this. So I'm not saying they're right, although I would suggest that their track record over the last few years has proven to be quite brilliant. But like you said, a lot of people think it's completely crazy. So we have to point that out as well.
And are there any other companies now following this example? Because you might say, well, they had came up with this new business strategy that they say, okay, we're just going to borrow money and we're going to buy Bitcoin because we can get fiat money very cheap, and we're going to buy something which is going to appreciate against fiat quite well and outperform fiat. So it doesn't matter how much we borrow, and we're going to just keep on doing that. And as I said,
Yeah.
he was criticized for that, and it's what a crazy person that is. And But now, you could say, well, maybe it's starting to pay, it seems to be paying off, especially when you say, okay, comparing their stock price with Nvidia, actually they're doing quite well, although they're not even producing anything. It's basically, we could say it's like a Bitcoin fund or something like
Right.
that. I
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
maybe they are and doing also good, great work. I don't really don't know MicroStrategy. But what wouldn't like typically happen in a market, like, okay, you have the first to market, and that's what I learned in business school, and those people, take a lot of risk. But being first to market doesn't necessarily mean that you will outperform others because those who are second and third can learn from your mistakes and actually then outperform you. Are there other companies following this example and saying, "Oh, well, that's an interesting business strategy. We're just going to get some cheap money and buy something which is going to, you know, outperform fiat over the long term period."
Yeah, there are companies starting now to adopt that strategy for sure. But to what you just said, and to I learned the same thing, by the way, in business school. I think the thing that makes this investment strategy so unique is I don't know at any time, at least in modern history, has the first mover advantage been so defining because they're first moving on an asset whose availability is diminishing every year to the public. So if you're the first person, let's say BlackBerry is the first person to come out with, or the first company to come out with a smartphone, and I don't know if they were or not, but they certainly were the first one to scale. Well, but there's no limitation on smartphones or smartphone technology or computer chips. So that enables Palm and Microsoft and Apple to then come in years later and mimic what they did. But if you're trying to buy Bitcoin now, MicroStrategy's average price on all of their Bitcoin is 74,000. Their first 21,000 Bitcoin cost them like 10,000. So if you're trying to come in today and buy Bitcoin, you're starting at 90,000. And of course, the more you accumulate, the higher the price goes. So their first mover advantage actually has almost prohibited any other company from ever duplicating exactly what they've done. You can mimic it, but I don't know that any other company is going to get to 280,000 or 300,000 Bitcoin ever again. Because if you were to try and do that now, where would you take the price? From 90,000 to what, a million? The US government, I guess, could do it, or Russia or China. A government could probably do it, but a company, it would be very difficult to do. So their first mover advantage has worked out really well because Bitcoin has a diminishing supply. Yeah, it's probably one of the only things in the world where even gold doesn't have a diminishing supply. It has a rare supply, but they produce 2-3% more gold every year than is needed, you know. So it's been this is an interesting little what would you call it, a business study, I guess, because to your point, somebody else now should be able to come in and say, well, I'm going to have more Bitcoin than them. But how do you do that without taking the price to $10 million? I don't know if anybody could buy $300,000 worth of Bitcoin without driving the price through the roof.
Well,
You know, and
is it though about like getting more than them? Isn't it just about following the same strategy and say, well, it worked for them, it worked for their company. I'm just
so
going to do the same. And just I mean, your model is sort of based on the fact that at some point there's just going to be no more Bitcoin to buy, or the price will not
right,
develop in some way. But apparently, MicroStrategy believes that the price will develop in the next 20 years. So couldn't you just hop on and say, okay, we'll ride also this, we'll surf the same
yes,
waves and we'll just step in later and we'll still be carried up to,
yeah, and I
3
think
million.
we're seeing that now. So I guess all I was commenting on, they're one of the few examples where the first mover advantage has probably locked them down for having the most. But to your question, no, other companies are starting to publicly acknowledge that they are doing this as well to mimic the trade. There's a company in Japan, I can't remember the name, but they actually hired one of the well-known analysts out of New York who followed the MicroStrategy move and hired them to be their investment advisor to mimic that strategy. And probably in the last couple of months, there's been many other companies that have come out that are saying they're going to start adding Bitcoin to their treasury. So people are mimicking it, but and that will continue, I believe, for a very long time. But in terms of the first mover advantage. I think in this particular case, they probably nailed it. And that's just because of the diminishing availability of the asset. And actually, I just saw this yesterday. Right now, OTC, which is over the counter, right now there's roughly 150,000 Bitcoin on all the exchanges globally. So MicroStrategy has 280,000 Bitcoin. So there's almost half of what they have even available to the world over the counter. Now you can get Bitcoin in other ways, but I'm just saying that that's interesting that, 4 years ago, there was probably about 1.8 million Bitcoin over the counter, and now there's less than 200,000. So it's becoming harder and harder to acquire, which is probably another reason why we're seeing the price, starting to go up. There's many reasons, but that's one of them. Yeah.
I mean, we saw in the last bull run Elon Musk buying Bitcoin, and it made quite the news. I remember
Yeah.
that distinctly, and it drove up the price like crazy when that happened. And but then like well, yeah, well, and then he sold again some of the Bitcoin, and then that
He
also
sold
drove.
90% of it, actually.
Wow. So like what's going on there? Do you have any insight into that? Why would he not just follow the example of MicroStrategy also to just keep it and accumulate more
Well,
Bitcoin?
and this is where I come back to pointing out the fact that Michael Saylor has controlling shares in his company. So Elon doesn't. So he has to listen to his board of directors. And his board of directors did not have the same commitment to his ideology about Bitcoin as maybe he did. So they sold 90% of the Bitcoin that they held. They still have about 10% of what they originally purchased. Here's an interesting thing, though, just to show you price appreciation. When they originally bought, and I don't know how much they bought, but they spent 1.5 billion to buy their original stash of Bitcoin. Over the next couple of years, they sold 90% of it. They only had 10% left. But that 10% was valued this week at $1 billion. So after spending 1.5, selling 90% of it, they still have $1 billion left. So it turns out that Elon was right. So
Yeah, and his board apparently,
yeah, and
not so
and so
much.
I'm sure they'll start investing in Bitcoin again as well. Maybe not with that same big buy-in, but they didn't sell all of it, and what they did keep is worth 2/3 of what they'd actually spent originally, and after selling 90% of it. So yeah, it's just an interesting little side note. Yeah.
It is similar like the discussion of the board of Microsoft, which is not like in favor of
Mm,
buying Bitcoin. Like they're also
right.
like skeptical of that. And we talked about that, touched upon that very briefly.
Yeah, in one of the previous videos. Yeah, yeah, and actually, they're having their board meeting. I think in early December. So one of the major investors, had asked to put it on the agenda. So we'll see what happens. I don't think they will either. As you said, the board has already come out and said they don't want to do it. But the fact that these are even in discussions at companies the size of Microsoft or Tesla or whatever, or the U.S. government, is pretty amazing considering where we were, well, not 4 years ago, even 2 years ago, with the downfall of FTX and some of the other things that went on. Um, and now it's being talked about in presidential campaigns and stuff. It's really become mainstream. BlackRock, of all companies, the biggest, investment company in the world. Um, the CEO of BlackRock is on the business shows all month, telling everybody they better buy it now. So again, this is not investment advice. I'm just repeating what he is saying. So it's really become much more mainstream over the past year or two, for sure.
I mean, we're going to see some interesting stuff happening when you talk about FTX, for example, that again, and we've seen that I think in every bull run and cycle that there's a lot of hype and then there's new actors coming in and they're going to try to participate in that and there's going to be people who get hurt in that process also probably that and we're just going to see something variation of that theme I would suspect now that every time there's just a different there's just the actors sort of change, but the pattern doesn't in effect somehow.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take the opposite side of that. I actually think that we won't see much of that this time because because of companies like BlackRock and Fidelity and the fact that the SEC approved these ETFs. In a way, it's a much more monitored and regular. I know we need more regulation, but it's much more monitored today than it was, 4 or 5 years ago. You don't see companies like Coinbase or Binance even talked about very much anymore, although they still have plenty of customers. People that want to invest in Bitcoin are now going to Fidelity. They're going to BlackRock. They're going to their investment accounts and just doing it that way, unless you're people like you and I that really study this, and then we feel more comfortable doing it ourselves. But the vast majority of people, if they want to buy Bitcoin, they're just going to call up their financial advisor and say, yeah, BlackRock or Fidelity or whoever is State Street, they're telling me I need some of this, so buy some. And that's, so it's I don't want to call it, nothing is risk free, but it is no less risky than buying a stock in the stock market or a pension fund or something like that. You know, so I don't think we're going to see the Wild West in this bull run anywhere near the same way that we saw it last time. Having said that, on a much smaller scale, I do believe that we will see actors trying to take advantage of people, but I don't think it's going to be in some big exchange or anything like that anymore.
Mm,
I think those days are over. Yeah,
mm,
because if you're BlackRock or you're Fidelity or any number of the other big ETFs, you can't have that. You can't be pitching an investment strategy in an industry that is the Wild West, you
right.
know? So, not to get into conspiracy theories, but I have a funny feeling that that's why some of the stuff that has happened over the last 2 years has happened. I have a funny feeling that that's why the chief of Binance paid a $4 billion fine, spent a few months at a country club prison, and is not allowed to run the company anymore. I don't think they really did anything too bad. I think that BlackRock doesn't want these types of characters running the market. They want to run the market, and regardless of what you and I think about that, I think that's the way we're headed. So the good news, I can think of lots of bad things about that, but the good news would be I think it's a much more safe environment today than it was a few years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we'll revisit this conversation in, I don't know, a couple of months or a year from now and see what actually has happened or and yeah, it's I think thanks for making that point. That's I think that's a very valid point. And my hypothesis is that everything which is still fluctuating to such a degree and still is in hasn't found really its price, let's say, in the market, that there's still considerable risk involved, and not just in
Mm.
terms of price, but other risks we still don't understand. Well, we always say we don't really understand what it is. It's a little bit like the internet. We didn't at the beginning didn't really understand it, and then there was the dot-com crash, and there were other crashes connected to
Yeah.
to that. So what I'm trying to say is probably we can't really anticipate where the next risk is coming from because things are still changing all the time. So probably
Yeah.
not
I
at
think
that
this,
level, but maybe at other levels or other with other actors or
absolutely.
something. It could be something.
Yeah. I think when you said what'd you say? We're still in the discovery phase. I think that's a fair assessment. I think it's safer now than it was 4 years ago, but there's still going to be things that we haven't considered yet.
Mm,
So we'll see what happens. Um, I suspect things will get frothy at some point. I suspect that things will cool off at some point. But to what degree compared to historical, I don't know. Yeah.
just to sort of like close off our discussion today, I just wanted to show again this chart you were talking about that the stock price. I just wanted to visualize it for
Sure.
anybody who's watching this, comparing this MicroStrategy to NVIDIA stock price. And here you see in blue is MicroStrategy and red is NVIDIA. And then here this is what has developed, especially in 2024. But even here, even in 2021, like how the stock prices developed of both these companies. And just to demonstrate again what you were talking about, and this with a company which I'm talking about MicroStrategy is I don't even know their products. Like again, maybe they're doing fantastic products, but that's
Yeah, I
not
mean,
why the price is developing in such a way.
no. I think that if you to go back from 2020 to 2010, you'd see that their stock price basically was flat for 10 years. They do development software for enterprise business. And I don't think that that business has grown much at all in the last decade. Um, and they made, somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million a year in profit and been chugging along. Um, it's the Bitcoin investment that's really done it for them. And a lot of people who didn't want to buy Bitcoin directly were using and still are using MicroStrategy as a proxy. They'll invest in MicroStrategy as a proxy for buying Bitcoin directly,
Oh, yeah, right.
and
Yeah.
and that's driven the stock price through the roof. Yeah.
Yeah, and that also to your point of having a little bit more security or to invest into a stock rather than into Bitcoin
Right.
directly to
Yeah.
say, okay,
Yeah.
uh,
Now, a lot of that investment was done before the ETF. But having said that, for reasons that are probably beyond my technical expertise, it still makes a lot of sense to buy MicroStrategy stock as opposed to the ETF. And I think one of the things would be the fee structure and stuff like that. So I don't see that changing much for them. So we'll see what happens. But it's
hmm,
been a very interesting trade. And as crazy as some people think that Michael Saylor has been, at least as of mid-November 2024, he's the only one laughing. So
hmm.
whether that continues, we don't know. But
Yeah.
so far, it's proven to be a very, very, very strategically brilliant move so far.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, with lots of ups and downs. Yes.
I
Yeah.
agree, and we'll see what the ups and downs bring. We'll stay in touch and try to monitor and comment on them, and especially now with all this, yeah, knowledge of how it was in the past, and see what's new and what's just repeating itself, basically. And we're
Yeah.
excited to do that.
Sounds good.
Right, thanks a lot, and talk to you soon.
Okay. Talk to you soon.